It's 2025 and we've gotten Squid Game Season 2 before GTA 6. What the f? It's the new year and I'm coming back with more content on this channel because a lot of y'all really like the July breakdown videos, so I guess I'm gonna be a production influencer now. For those of you who don't know, my name is Leo. I make music under the moniker of Icebox. I also produce music for other artists here in Singapore. The projects I've produced on have accumulated over 20 million streams on Spotify. You read the title. This is 5 music production tips for 2025, starting with number 1. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you guys is something that you already know, but you're just putting it at the back of your head and you're just leaving it there to rot. It's to organize your workflow. A lot of producers tend to overlook this in the sense where they think it will kill their creativity, but to me, it just does the exact opposite because it allows me to work faster. Let me show you an example. Here's the template that I have set in Logic. The way I've set up my buses and the way I've routed them all is kind of unique to my workflow. If you look over here, I have a bunch of sends that are not activated yet, but they're all reverbs, all ready to be used, a chorus, stereo widening, and some delay. Like, it's all ready. It allows me to finish tracks that I would normally take maybe a week or two to kind of get the demo out to like maybe just like 1 or 2 hours. And it's not just the pre-production session that you gotta prepare for. You really gotta get used to organizing as you go and as you're producing. Now, what I've got for you guys over here is one of the demos I'm working on for one of my new songs. And as you can see, everything over here is pretty neatly organized. They're all sorted into these folders over here, which I can easily collapse if I want to clean up the timeline. Everything's color-coded, everything's labeled. Even the individual tracks have the name of the stem, like the short form of it behind, because I'm looking at when I'm sending this to mix, how I want a mixing engineer to receive it. So if I were to hit export on all of this like this, I just select all of these and I hit export, all of these individual track names, when I drag them into a new project file, they're all going to be grouped, and that just makes mixing engineer's job so much easier when you're handing over stems. Having a good etiquette at organizing your workflow helps in more than just a personal way. It also helps other people to work with you easier and know that you're a very reliable producer. The next tip I have for you guys is to use your plugins on purpose. And what I mean by this is every time you add a plugin to your effects chain or your effect rack, you have to be able to know why you did it. A lot of people tend to just slap random plugins into their mixers because they found it on a YouTube tutorial. I think that's not a very good practice because it ends up like overloading your CPU and you could just potentially be ruining like the cleanliness of a sound that you don't need to fix. In this case over here, we are working with a Yamaha DX7 simulator that I made with this synth called Dex, and it sounds like this. First thing I noticed when I heard the keys was it had this really nice analog texture that I wanted to emphasize more, but I didn't like this bell-like transient in the high end, so I used Trans X Multi from Waves to take it out. Just gave it a little bit more of a gentler touch. After that, I'm adding this Super VHS for some width because I wanted to add this chorus that sounded a little bit more analog. So you can see instantly it just widens it, but at the same time keeping the nice retro analog feel. After that, I'm using this FabFilter Pro Q to just kind of tame this muddy frequency that I heard around, I think like 250, 400 hertz. So you see the change that made it so much more clean. And then I'm adding this reverb to kind of emphasize the room that it's in. And then to give it this pumpy feel, I added Shaperbox so that it sits in the mix better. So you see that I'm not overloading the Shaperbox with the mix over here, it's just at 30%, and that will actually lead me to my next tip for you guys, which is... Now, what I mean by mixing at 100% is knowing what your plugin is doing to the sound. It's a little bit different from the previous tip, which I'm going to show you. In this track, you're also going to be hearing a lot of distorted lead atmospheric sounds, and they sound like this in the mix. And one very obvious element from that is this reverb I've added over here. And this process is something that's very applicable to reverb, plugins like reverb and delay, time-based effects. It's always better to know what it sounds like 100% wet. And then just slowly dial back the mix so that you know where's the sweet spot between dry and wet that you want to keep the sound in. I think this process allows you to have a deeper understanding of what your plugins do to your sounds every time you add them to the effect chain. But I feel like a lot of producers kind of misuse how they apply this trick, which is layering with intention. I feel like every time you add a layer in your track, it should serve a purpose. You have to know what this layer is doing in your particular track. So in this case, I got the drums over here. Every time I add a sound, I'm always starting with a groove. Obviously, when I was going through the track, I knew I was going to add a few things. For one, I was going to add this really distorted room kind of like texture to kind of give the drum a lot more character. And you see I'm processing that almost like it's a mono room mic. There's heavy compression and saturation going on there. And when I add it with the drums, and we can get even more to the specifics over here. Like I want that snare to kind of pop on more, so I'm adding this extra clap snare sample. And all these percussions that I'm adding kind of glue the pocket in a certain way when they play with the guitar. So you see, every layer that you add should add something to the track as a whole. If I take out simple things like the room, one percussion loop, and I take out this clap snare, the drums just won't have the same kind of impact as they do in the whole track. And then you add them back in, it just gives it a lot more of that character that you're looking for. The last tip that I have for you guys is more of an arrangement trick rather than a production trick, and that's to be able to reverse engineer your favorite sounds from your favorite records. Being able to recreate sounds on the spot is something that's really important as a producer, because when your clients kind of give you a reference track and they want you to create that like guitar tone, or they want that synthesizer that's in that track, you got to be able to know how to do it, or at least know the fundamentals of how to kind of create that. In this case over here, I really got heavily inspired by the 1975's I Like It When You're Asleep For You're So Beautiful and Unaware of It album. And especially if I go through this guitar over here, so this riff is the main one. And I spent a lot of time listening to that track, She's American. And I really kind of wanted to get that spanky, chorusy guitar tone that he played, so I got my friend to play a Telecaster on this. I'm just applying some light compression to this, because I noticed that in the original, it's a little bit more controlled, you know, it's not very dynamic. And then I'm adding this CLA guitar over here, and I'm dialing in the settings to try and get the tone as close as I can. And then once I did that, I did some EQ matching with the original. So you can see it's actually not a lot. I really just, all I had to do was just put in this EQ over here that kind of tamed the low mids. And then I'm just adding this reverb to taste. I'm not really sure if they do it. And this is just something that like I did as an option to give it more room. And this whole process was just me going back and forth on Spotify, trying to kind of like get the guitar tone as close as I can from that raw Telecaster, and I'm adding all those plugins, and I'm also using the tips that I've told you guys previously. So yeah, that was my top 5 production tips for 2025. Feel free to use these. Let me know if it was useful. Let me know if I was as useful as a cabbage rotting on the street in Korea. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any specific tutorials you want me to kind of go through, or any tracks you want me to break down, or if you want to see any other content on this channel. That's it. Goodbye.